Welcome to Module 3 Part 2 of the EstimatorXpress Software Skills course. In this module we're going to create an estimate and estimate several elements of the job using estimating calculators, or workbooks as we call them. We're going to estimate several different preliminary costs and a range of different elements of the build. We'll cover a range of different workbook types, and hopefully this will give you the skills and understanding you need to carry out a complete estimate yourself. For the purposes of training today, we're going to imagine we're estimating a simple single-story lean-to extension. If you've attended the Module 3 Part 1 Quick Quote module, you'll notice some repetition, such as the process for creating an estimate. Please bear with me, so that the practice will help to reinforce your knowledge and understanding of the software. We'll also, of course, be covering a lot of new ground. You'll learn about some of the key differences between estimating using Quick Quote and estimating using workbooks or estimating calculators. To get started, on the main menu click My Estimates. This will bring you to the My Job screen. This is where you'll find all of your estimates. Before we begin estimating, I'm just going to give you a quick run through of all the different buttons on the top menu in this screen. To start a new estimate, click on the New Estimate button on the top menu. This will launch the Estimate Wizard. The first screen prompts you to decide how you're going to create your estimate. There are 4 different ways you can do this. You can use Quick Quote to estimate using a standard job template, or you can use Quick Quote to produce a custom estimate for renovation jobs or more bespoke non-standard builds. You can import plans you've drawn or traced in EstimatorXpress to take off and estimate directly from the drawing. Or you can produce an estimate from scratch using estimating calculators, which are also known as workbooks. For today's session, we're going to use this bottom option to estimate using estimating calculators. Click the Custom Estimate using Estimating Calculators option. Click the Custom Estimate using Estimating Calculators option. Now you need to fill out the estimate details. The job name can be the client's name, the job address, anything you want as long as it makes sense to you. So type in the job name. Then select a job description. There's a drop-down selection box here, so you can choose one of the descriptions from the list here, otherwise you can type in your own description. The job description will appear in the customer quote, so make sure you type it and spell it correctly. For this example, I'm going to select the lean-to extension job description. The job number is automatically allocated by EstimatorXpress, and it will be one more than the previous job number. If you want, you can type your own number in, just make sure it's a number that hasn't been used before. Click where it says click here to enter to enter in your customer's address details. These details can be updated later if need be, but it's important that you fill them out at some point because these details will appear on the customer quote. So make sure you spell the client's name correctly. So fill out the customer's name and their address. Then if the site address details are the same as the customer address details, as they would be in the case of an extension or renovation work, then click the Copy Details to the site address tick box. Once you've done that, click Update. The next option is to select a price book. This should always be the master price book, which is selected by default, so you can leave it as it is. Now you need to select a group of workbooks. If you recall back to Module 2, groups of workbooks are ready-made lists of calculators that you would typically need for different types of work. So click on the drop-down box. And for our example, we're going to select the lean-to extension group of workbooks. You'll see there's a number of different types available for different kinds of work. Click on the description that best matches the work you're doing, and EstimatorXpress will preload a long list of workbooks which you might need to estimate from. If you want to tweak the group of workbooks at this stage, you can click the Edit button. And you can then add or delete workbooks from the list by ticking or unticking them. For now, I'm going to leave the list as it is and click Close. Of course, you can add or delete workbooks from your estimate later on from the job summary screen. Now we can set a start date for the job and choose a default bar chart type. To set a start date, click on the Start Date drop-down box. You can click through the months using the arrows at the top, and then click on a date to select the start date. If you don't know the start date for your job, which is not unusual at the outset of dealing with a client, then you can update the job start date at any time whilst your estimate's been worked on. So for practice purposes today, simply select a month and click on the start date. If you select a Monday, then you'll get a whole week on the Gantt chart, on the bar chart, when we look at that later. Next we can select the chart type. Click on the drop-down arrow for the chart type drop-down box and select the small extension option. The bar charts you choose are not generated from the estimate. Rather, they're typical build programs for a particular type of job. We'll look at these in more detail in Module 4. Now we can choose the base specification for the estimate. So click on the specification drop-down box. For this estimate, we're going to use the extension specification. You'll recall from Module 2 that using the extension specification means we have slightly higher costs than a new build due to tasks taking slightly longer. Once you've chosen your base specification, you can then further refine your specification using mini-specs. Mini-specs allow you to pre-select different building materials relevant to specific areas of the build. So for example, you can choose the brick being used for the job. So if you click on the drop-down box, you can select either a facing brick or reclaimed facing brick, and all you do is click on the price of the brick you're going to use. You'll see there's also options for new builds and for extensions or renovations. The extension or renovation option will increase the build speed, so there'll be slightly higher costs. So for our example today, we're going to click on the 50p facing brick for extension or renovation option. There are also mini specs for the tile, so if you click on the roof tiling drop-down box, you can select the type of tiling system being used. So you can use a plain tile option if you're using small clay tiles, or pan tiles if you're using modern large concrete type tiles, or you can select slate. These all come with new build or extension and renovation options, which again will alter the build speeds. So for our example today, select the pan tile for extension or renovation option. Next, you can select a specification of roof guttering. For our example today, we're going to use the plastic rectangular gutter to 80mm round downpipe option. The next drop-down option allows you to select the fascias, barge boards and soffits to the sloped roofs. If you click on the drop-down box, you'll see there's a UPVC option or different widths of softwood. For our example today, we're going to select the softwood 200mm fascia and barge board option. We can ignore the next drop-down option because this relates to fascias, barge boards and soffits to any flat roofs on your job. And you'll recall the example we're doing here is a lean-to roof extension, so we can just ignore any drop-down boxes that aren't relevant. Next, we can select the decoration mini specification. Select the HPXL default decoration for extension or renovation option. And then finally, we can select the plant and labour for excavation specification. So typically on an extension you'd be using a mini digger and driver, but say for example space were really limited on this site, we could select the excavation using manual labour option. Okay, so once you've selected your mini specs, there are just a couple of things left to do before you create your estimate. You can click the Review Profit Markup button to set up the amount of profit markup you want for this particular estimate. You'll recall profit markup is set into 5 sections to correspond with the 5 sections of the price book. These figures here of 30% have come from the My Profit option in the My Settings menu. So you can tweak the figures here if you want to, and it will only affect this particular job. Remember that a 15% markup typically works out to be a net profit of 0 for the average small to medium sized builder. In other words, 15% will cover the overheads that you can't attribute to your estimate. So if you take 15% as your baseline, add on top of that the amount of net profit you would like to make. So a 30% markup would give you around a 15% net profit. Of course, these figures are really general, so you should speak to your accountant who can help you work out some more exact figures. For our training today, we're going to leave these figures set to the default, so leave them set at whatever is the default figure in your software, and then click Close. You can click the Review Inflation Rates button to adjust the inflation rates. Remember, if you don't intend to apply inflation on your quote, then changing the figures on this screen will have no effect. Once you're happy with your inflation rates, click Close. And just a quick tip before we create the estimate. If you want to save the job profile you've just set up, so that includes the selected specification, mini specifications, chart type, and so on, click the Save Job Profile button. Then when you estimate a similar job in the future, you can select that job profile using the Select Job Profile button. Okay, so once you're happy with your selections, click the Create Estimate button. After a few moments then, your job summary screen will appear. Treat the job summary screen as the home page of your estimate. Before we start any estimating, we're going to have a look through the menu at the top of the screen and the different tabs that you can see underneath the top menu. First, let's take a look at the top menu options. So we've got the Close button, which will take you back to the My Job screen. Then we've got the Open Workbook button. Click on a workbook in the list, and then click the Open Workbook button to open up the workbook and start estimating. The Add Workbook button allows you to add workbooks to the job that are not already in the job summary list. If you click Add Workbook, you'll be presented with a list of workbooks that you can choose to add to your estimate. You can scroll up and down the list to select a workbook. Click on any workbook for a description of what the workbook estimates. You can also focus in on one workbook type using the Workbook Type drop-down box. So if you click on the drop-down box and select Doors, then you'll be presented with a list of all the different types of door. If we go back to the Workbook Type drop-down box, scroll to the top and select the All option, then all of the workbooks will appear in the list again. Now you can also locate a workbook by typing in a keyword. So for example, if we type in the word bay, don't click the Enter key after you type in a keyword. Just type in the word and then wait, and you'll see that a filtered list of workbooks will appear. So we're looking at all of the workbooks with the word bay in their name. Then you simply need to tick the tick box of any workbooks that you want to add to your estimate and click the Select button. The next button on the menu is the Delete Workbook button. You might not be surprised to learn that this button will delete the selected workbook from the job summary list. You can do this if you want to make the list smaller and easier to read. If you delete a workbook by mistake, don't worry, you can go to the Add Workbook button and add it back into your estimate. The next button we've got here is the Recalc Estimate button. This option is used to correct an estimate. Typically this happens if you change the price of a resource partway through an estimate and then you need to recalc or recalculate the entire estimate. The next button is the Save button. Click this button to save the data from the job summary screen. The next button is the Import PlansXpress Plan button. This option allows you to import a PlansXpress drawing into the estimate. Typically you do that when you've already imported a drawing, you've modified the drawing, and then you want to re-import the modified drawing to amend the estimate. The next button we've got here is the Run Quick Quote button. You would use this button when you have estimated using Quick Quote and you want to launch the Quick Quote to make some changes to it. So if you're estimating from scratch as we are today, you don't need to use this button. The next button we've got here then is the Sort Workbooks button. This button allows you to move workbooks up and down the list in the job summary. You can also use this option to save a new group of workbooks for future use. We've got a Find button. This is handy for finding a workbook on the job summary list when your eyes are getting tired from staring at the screen. And then finally we've got a Get Materials Quote button. Again, you can use this button to request a Crystal Direct material quote. Okay, so that's the options on the top menu. Let's now have a look at the tabs. So we started on the Summary tab, which is where all of the workbooks are located. As I mentioned earlier, this is the home page of your estimate. If you're stuck and you're not sure where you're up to, click on the Job Summary tab and it'll bring you back here to this screen. Next we've got the Price Book tab. The price book here is a copy of the master price book. This means you can go into the price book in the estimate and alter the prices for this job if needs be. These changes won't affect any other estimates or your master price book, which allows you to have unique pricing for a specific job. The flip side of this is that you might see a price for a resource which is wrong when you're estimating within a job. And you might decide that you want to change that universally. In other words, change the price of an item in the estimate and also change it in the master price book. And it is possible to do this. So click on the Price Book tab and then click the Materials section and click Select. So we're just going to imagine that we have altered some material prices in the estimate and we want to synchronize those changes to the master price book. So remember, at this moment we are looking at the estimates price book. It's a copy of the master price book and any changes made in here will only affect this particular estimate. So if you've made some changes that you want to update to the master price book, you would click on the Synchronize button. And then you get a series of options which allow you to decide what exactly you're going to synchronize. So first of all, you can decide whether you want to synchronize the entire price book or just the section that you're in. So at the moment it's saying we can synchronize just the materials section of the price book or all of the sections of the price book. So for now we're going to just select the top option. There's also an option to download the latest material prices. Click Next. On the next screen we can decide to synchronize all resources or just new resources. The second option would be the way to go if we've just added a new material and would like to be able to use it in other estimates. If you have amended the price of some existing items in the price book, then you would need to go for the top option because this will check and update all of the resources within the price book. So once you've done that, click Next. On the last screen then you can decide which way you want to synchronize the price books. It may be that you've updated your master price book and you want to copy the changes across to your job price book, in which case you can select this option here. If you've made changes within the estimate price book and you want to copy those changes across to the master price book, then you would select the bottom option. So for this example then we're going to opt to synchronize from this price book to the master price book, and then once you've done that, click Finish. EstimatorXpress will take a few moments to synchronize your price books, so for now I'm going to click Cancel. Okay, remember you can click the Summary tab to jump back to the job summary at any time. I'm going to scroll back up to the top of my summary screen. When I added the workbook, it popped it in at the bottom of the screen there. Okay, the next tab we've got is the Specification tab, the Spec tab. Just like the price book, this is a copy of the specification that we chose in the Estimate Wizard when we were creating our estimate. You can change items in this spec and they will only affect this estimate, this particular job. If you want to make changes within this estimate, the quickest way to do it is in the spec. You can make global changes to the materials so that they're used in all of the relevant workbooks within the estimate. You can also change the selected mini specs from here. You see this mini specs button at the top. You'll see that most of the buttons are the same as in the specification from the My Settings menu, but there are a few additional buttons that I just want to talk through. The Apply Spec button you would use if you make a change to the spec. Once you click the Apply Spec button, EstimatorXpress will run through all of the workbooks that have been used and change the relevant data to match the changes you've made in the specification. Then we've got the Library button. If you click the Library button, you will see a list of all of the original specifications. You can select a different one if you think you've chosen the wrong specification when you started the job in the Estimate Creation Wizard. The Save Spec button allows you to save any changes you've made to the specification to use in the future. When you save the specification, you can either overwrite the original, thus improving the spec for the next time you use it, or you can make an entirely new one with a new name. And you do the latter if you've made a set of changes here that are specific to a particular circumstance, and you may come across those circumstances in the future. The final button is the Check Lintels and Cavity Closer button. This option does what it says. We've put this function in because under the new Part L regs, it's quite likely you'll have wider cavities, especially when you're doing new builds. So this button allows you to check that you've got the correct lintels and cavity closers. It will only work once you've estimated some cavity items, in other words walls, and when you've estimated some items that interact with the cavity, so windows, doors, openings and so on. Okay, now let's click the Summary tab to return to the job summary. You'll see there are 5 other tabs we've got here: Chart, Reports, Address, Profit and Inflation, and we'll cover some of those in Module 4 of the EstimatorXpress Software Skills course. Let's make a start with the estimating then. We're going to look at several commonly used workbooks and look at the various types of calculators in EstimatorXpress. We're going to start off by looking at some simple preliminary and sundry workbooks. Each of these workbooks will only take a couple of minutes to complete. Find the workbook called Planning and Design Costs. You'll remember Planning and Design Costs was one of the workbooks which we added to the Lean-to extension group of workbooks in Module 2. Now you'll remember that if you want to open the workbooks, you need to click the Open Workbook button on the top menu, or you can right click and click the Open Workbook option that way. Once the workbook is opened up, a dialog box pops up giving you a suggested name and location for this worksheet. You can change the default values if you want, otherwise if you're happy as they are, click OK. You'll then be presented with a list of different dimensional templates for different sizes of job. These will all lead to the same dimensions wizard, but they have different default values entered, so they'll speed up the process of estimating. Select the dimensional template which best matches the job that you're estimating. So in this example, we're going to use the planning and design costs for small home extension template. Once you've clicked on it, click Select. Now, if you've watched the video on estimating with Quick Quote, Module 3, Part 1, you'll see that this workbook is identical to the workbook in Quick Quote. You'll see that there's a list of seven different types of cost associated with planning and design which you might incur in any particular job. Some default figures are already included, but of course you can change these if you need to. So perhaps the architect's fees are only £400 for this job. You would just simply overtype the figure. Perhaps the structural engineer's fees are actually £500 for this job. Click into the box, type in the figure for this job, and you do that for each of the different types of cost. Once you're done, click Finish. So that's it for the first workbook. You can click Close to go back to the worksheet menu, and then click Close again to return to the job summary screen. Now when you close down a workbook in this way, a box will pop up asking if the workbook is now complete. If you know you filled in all the information needed, then just click Yes. If you think you might need to come back to this workbook later to change things, you would click No. This is just for your information. You can still go in and out of the workbook as much as you want. If you think you've set this wrong and you want to set a workbook as not completed, then you can right click on the workbook and click the Toggle Workbook Complete option, and you'll see that workbook is no longer set to be completed. This is a useful feature when you're working through a large estimate and you want to know which workbooks are finished and which ones require further attention. You can also use the Comments box here to put in a reminder of what you need to look at, or indeed any sort of comment that's useful to you. So, for example, I'm going to type in here, check design fees. Remember that where a cell is white, it means you can type directly into it. So use the completed option and the comments box to help you keep abreast with what you've completed and what you need to go back and finish off. Now we're going to look at the site establishment workbook. In your summary list, near the top, you should find a workbook called Site Establishment. This is full of all sorts of preliminary costs, many of which can easily be forgotten and will leave you seriously out of pocket if they're not included in your estimate. So click on the Site Establishment workbook and open it up. So you can use the Open Workbook button, or right click and click Open Workbook and open the workbook that way. Again, if you've watched the Module 3 Part 1 video on estimating with Quick Quote, this workbook should be really familiar. So you can change the worksheet name and location if you need to, or click OK if you're happy with the default values that EstimatorXpress has put in there. You're given a list of different dimensional templates for different sizes of job, just as you were with the Planning and Design Costs workbook. So select the template which best matches your job. So in this example, we're going for the Site Establishment for Small Extension option. There's also an option for a small extension using the customer toilet. So this one will include a portable toilet, this one doesn't. Once you've selected your template, click Select. So this workbook deals with the creation of a site compound if you need one, the cost of welfare items like site cabin and toilet, some sundry skip permit costs, insurance and health and safety costs. As you can see, most of the items here are bought in units of time, weeks and months and so on. What this means is that you may need to come back into this workbook later on when you've got a firmer idea of the duration of your job to make sure the figures are correct. So let's work our way through these boxes and set the values to something that would be correct for our job. So let's say for our lean-to extension, we're going to need the site cabin for 12 weeks. And again, the site toilet for 12 weeks. We're not going to need any security fencing, so we'll set that to 0. and the duration of fence hire to 0. We don't need a JCB to clear the site. We don't need any additional labourer time to set up the site compound because we're not going to have one. But we'll leave the skip for site clearance set to 1. Once you've done that, click Next. There are 3 different screens to this workbook. Now, if you were building a house, you'd very likely be making a site compound, in which case you would enter the dimensions of the compound here. For our training purposes, we're going to build an extension, so we don't need to make a site compound. This means we can leave it all set to 0, so that's fine. Click Next. The final screen deals with some sundry project costs. So let's imagine we don't need a skip permit or any skip parking bay suspensions. We can check the insurance costs. The insurance cost box here allows you to apportion some of your annual insurance costs to the job. We've got site security costs, health and safety costs. So health and safety costs covers things like signage, PPE, health and safety consultation or software, and other costs relating to health and safety incurred for this particular job. Put in any figures you like into the boxes. Remember, all these costs at the bottom are bought in factors of pounds, so just type in the number of pounds each element will cost. And once you're done, click Finish. To return quickly to the Job Summary tab, we can just click the Summary tab rather than clicking Close and Close. When you close down this way, the box will not pop up asking if the workbook is complete. So if you want to set the workbook to be complete, right-click on the workbook and click the Toggle Workbook Complete option, and you'll see the workbook will get that completed marker. Now let's have a look at the sundry plant. Click on the sundry plant workbook and open it up. In the box which pops up, click OK to accept the suggested work name and location as we've done before. And then we'll be given a list of dimensional templates again for different sizes of job. Click on the one which best fits your job, so in this case, small single-story extension, and click Select. Now the Sundry Plant Workbook is a long list of assorted things you may typically hire or buy for a job. So the first screen just deals with Sundry Plant Hire. All you do is enter the number of weeks each item will be required for. So you can click the Tab key on your keyboard to move between the input boxes, then simply type in how long you require each different item of plant or each tool. Once you're happy with those figures, click Next. Now the next screen deals with tool and plant purchases. Now the costs of all of these come out of your back pocket, so you need to attribute the relevant ones to this estimate. Take a minute or two to have a look at the list. We don't need to put any figures in unless you want to for practice purposes. Just have a look at the sundry plant items which you may need to purchase for this particular job and enter any figures as you see fit. So this time you can see the unit of purchase is number because we're buying them, we're not hiring them. So once you're happy with those, click Next. This is the third and final screen. This deals with the estimate spoil and waste plant hire. Again, just have a look at those. Update the figures if you want to. And once you're done, click Finish. So that's how you estimate your sundry plant. Click the Summary tab to go straight back to the job summary. And we're now going to have a look at the travel cost workbook. Remember, you can right click and set the workbook to be complete if you're happy you've finished estimating everything you need. And then we're going to click on travel costs and we're going to open up the travel costs workbook. Now this travel cost workbook works in exactly the same way as Quick Quote. So if you've viewed Module 3 Part 1, it will be very familiar to you. Click OK to accept the default name and location for the travel costs worksheet. In this workbook there's only one dimensional template, so click on it and click Select. Okay, so you see the travel costs workbook includes lines for 3 different sizes of van. So just to be clear, a large van would be something like a long wheelbase transit or a Luton type vehicle. A medium van would be your standard transit type van, and a small van would be something like an Escort or Focused size van. So first of all you need to select the van which suits you first. So which type of van do you own? So say you own a medium size van. Then you need to think about how many miles per day you'll drive to and from the site, and then how many days you'll be on site. So let's do a quick example. Assume you have a medium van, your journey to site is 5 miles. So that's 5 miles each way there and back, so that's 10 miles per day in total. Let's say our job is going to take 3 months. So working on the basis of 20 working days per month, that's 60 days in total of travelling 10 miles a day. So that comes to 600 miles. So you'd simply type 600 into the travel cost medium van. If you had 2 identical vehicles doing the same mileage, you'd simply double the quantity of miles. So in this case we would type in 1200. We'll see what those 600 miles equate to in a moment. So once you've entered in your mileage, then have a look to see if there are any parking fees or daily congestion charges which you need to add to your estimate. Of course these can be really significant, so you need to take them into account. Once you've done that, click Finish. We're now going to have a look at the View Resources Output button. So if you click View Resources Output on the top menu, here you'll be able to see what your 600 miles equate to. So you can see here we've got our medium size van. And you'll see that EstimatorXpress allows expenses of 70p per mile. So for our 600 miles covered, it has added £420 to the estimate. This goes towards fuel, towards wear and tear, and also towards your vehicle depreciation. And if you don't take it into account, you're going to be several £1000s out of pocket each year for every vehicle you have. So once you're happy that you've accounted for your travel costs, click Summary to return to the Job Summary tab. Now we're going to have a look at one more list type of workbook called subcontract quotations. Now if you have estimated subcontract quotations using Quick Quote, this will look slightly different to you. So the subcontract quotations workbook normally can be found towards the bottom of your list. So click subcontract quotations and then open the workbook up. Now you need to click on the subcontract quotations worksheet and click the Open Worksheet button. Now when you do this, a box pops up saying check the number of items. You currently have number of items set to 0 for this worksheet, meaning that nothing will be estimated. So 9 times out of 10, all you need to do is enter the figure 1. This means it will multiply everything that you add to the workbook by 1. If you wanted to double the costs of all these subcontract quotations for some reason, you could type in 2 here, and that will double all the costs. Okay, so usually just type in 1, then click OK. And now we can enter our subcontract quotations. You can see here we've got a list of all the different types of subcontract quotations that you might want to add to your estimate. And you'll see the purchase cost for all of those is set to £1. You may remember them from the price book. So let's pick the plumber quotation. Let's say we have a subcontract plumber who's going to come in and supply and fit radiators and connect them to the existing system for £750. So you can move across to the quantity per item column and simply type in 750. Of course, you can type directly into the column because it's a white column. If hashtags appear like this, don't worry. All it means is that there's too much data to fit into the cells. So if you right click anywhere on the screen and click the auto fit option, then the columns will be expanded and those figures will appear. So we've added our subcontract plumbing quotation of £750 to the estimate. Remember, the figures you enter here are excluding profit, so profit will be added on top of this. So you'd use this workbook when you're subcontracting out some work and the subcontractor's doing the work at a set price. Once you've finished with this workbook, click Summary to return to the summary screen. Now we're going to have a look at several dimension-based workbooks. The core of your construction estimating is dimension-based. Most construction parts of the build are based on the dimensions of your job, so you'll need to tell the software the length and height of various aspects of your build. And you'll also need to select lots of other different estimating options. So if you have previously watched the video on Quick Quote, Module 3 Part 1, you'll see that this is where things start to work a bit differently. You'll need to enter the dimensions very carefully into the workbooks as there is less pre-filled data. Unlike when you estimate with Quick Quote, you don't select a job template, so EstimatorXpress doesn't know the layout of your building. Okay, so we're going to dive straight into one of the biggest and most commonly used workbooks in EstimatorXpress, the Brick and Block Cavity Wall Workbook. So if you scroll to the top of the screen, if you're not there already, and you'll see about 10 workbooks down, there's a workbook called Brick and Block Cavity Wall. Find that workbook and open it up. Click OK to select the pre-filled worksheet name and location. When you're doing your own estimates, you can of course type in whatever name and use whatever location you want, as long as it makes sense to you. You're now given a list of different dimensional templates. As with all of the estimating we've done so far, you'll recall that they all lead to the same dimension wizard but have different default values entered, so they speed up the estimating process. You'll notice that there are some Part L templates here. These are for use when you've selected a Part L specification, so usually for new builds. Today we're going to click on the single story cavity wall dimensional template and then click Select. The dimension wizard will now open up for our wall. At the top of the wizard it tells you which page you're on and how many there are in total. And of course in the middle we've got the pictures, the diagrams with assorted dimensions and options for you to work through. Often there's an extra screen for you to have a look at on the bottom left. On the screen you'll see it concerns gable dimensions. If you move your mouse over any of the input boxes, you'll see some information pops up about which dimension you need to enter. We'll have a look at the tick boxes at the bottom of the screen later. So on this screen there are two really obvious dimensions. There's the height of the wall and the length of the wall. There's also an area of openings dimension input box in the middle of the wall. When you put a figure in here, EstimatorXpress will omit the area of bricks, blocks, insulation, wall ties, mortar and so on from the costs. Really important note here, all dimensions in EstimatorXpress wizards are input in meters. So don't type in millimeter dimensions as you'll be 1000 times too big on everything. So a wall height would be something like 2.4 meters rather than 2400 millimeters. Okay, so a quick bit of theory about estimating walls. All of the cavity wall workbooks have the option to estimate the wall and also the gables if there are any. What this means is that you need to take a moment to think about the best and quickest way to estimate your walls. You can of course estimate each wall individually and click on the gable button for any walls with gables on top. but you can speed up the process by duplicating walls. So on page 1 of the Dimensions wizard here, there's an option to enter the number of identical walls. So if you have walls that are the same, you can put in one set of dimensions, but say that you want 2 or more identical walls. If one has a gable and one doesn't, then it's obviously not identical, so don't try and mix them. The other way of speeding up your estimating, assuming there are no gables, is to estimate one wall, which is the total length of all of your walls, and includes one figure, which is the sum of all of your openings. So for our example, we're going to do a lean-to extension. So we're going to create 2 identical side walls that do have gables, but no openings. So on the left-hand side, change the height of the wall to 2.4 meters. So you'd click into the box and type in 2.4. And at the bottom, change the length of the wall to 3 meters. Now on the right-hand side, change the number of identical walls to 2. So we're saying we've got 2 identical walls which are 2.4 meters high by 3 meters long. Now before we move to the next screen, we're going to have a look at the gable dimensions, because of course we need to estimate the gables on these side walls. So click Gable Dimensions. As you can see from the diagrams here, you can estimate a half gable or a full gable. For our example, we're estimating the half gable to top off our side walls for our lean-to extension. So on the right hand side, you can see 2 input boxes labelled A and B, which relate to A and B on the diagram. So for our extension, we're going to type in the width of the brick gable of 3 meters to match the walls underneath, and we're going to enter the height of brick gable of 1.4 meters. There are no openings in our gables, so that's everything we need to enter. Then click Wall Dimensions to go back to the main page of the wizard. So now we've attached the gables to the top of our walls, we've set the height and length of our side walls, and we've said that we want 2 of these walls as they're completely identical. So now we can click Next. So page 2 of the Wall Dimension Wizard deals with the foundations. Before we go any further, let's switch on the tech tips. So if you tick the Show Tech Tips tick box. With tech tips switched on, when you click into an input box, you get expanded help at the top right of the wizard, which explains in depth what dimension you need to enter. So looking at the dimensions on this screen, there's the foundation depth below site strip, the width of the foundation, and depths for 2 different types of concrete. The top dimension is for structural concrete, and the bottom dimension allows for you to estimate mass concrete if needed. We're going to leave these all set as they are for today. On the right hand side there are 2 more boxes. The top one is to plank and strut the excavation. We're going to change that to say no, because we don't want to plank and strut the excavation. You can type in an uppercase N or a lowercase n, it doesn't matter, as long as you type in N. That will not estimate planking and strutting the excavation. Underneath this we've got the bulking of excavated material input box. So this is simply the multiplying factor for soil when it bulks up after being removed from the ground and put into a skip. Typically soil increases in volume by about 1.5 times, so it takes up 50% more room. This calculation, or this figure, helps us calculate how many skips are required. Leave it set to 1.5 and click Next. Now page 3 has quite a lot of information on it. It deals with the footings of the walls. It's a good time to use the other tick box here, the Show Tech Labels tick box. This adds some labels to our diagram to help us understand what information we need to enter. We're not going to change any of these dimensions as they are all fairly typical, but of course you can go in and alter them to suit your job. Spend a moment just hovering your mouse over the different input boxes to see what dimensions they all relate to. You can see on the right hand side of the screen we've also got options for insulation and DPC, which are set to yes, as you'd expect. So once you've had a look at all that information there, click Next. Now page 4 deals with the finishing options for the wall, and it also has a button for looking at the gable finishes as well. On the right hand side there you'll see there are 5 options covering plastering, wall decoration, the fitting of skirting boards and the priming and decoration of skirting boards. The number of skirting boards is set to 1 because this is a single story wall. If you were using a double story template then it would be set to 2, so you've got a skirting board for your downstairs and for your upstairs wall. So set these options to whatever suits you and then click the button on the bottom left which says plastering and decoration to gable. As you'd expect, this screen allows you to plaster, decorate and fit skirting to a gable area. As you can see from the pictures, this could be when you are building a house and the attic area is being built as a room, or it could be for a vaulted ceiling, as in our case. If we were building a normal flat ceiling in our extension, then we would not need to finish the gables as it would be hidden away, so you could just ignore these options. So for our example, we're going to look at the picture on the right. At the bottom you'll see 4 input boxes labelled A, B, C and D, which correspond with the dimensions A, B, C and D on the diagram. So we're going to leave A set to 0 because we're going to plaster right up to the corner. B will be the internal length of the wall. So a 3 metre long wall minus the thickness of the wall of what will be the main extension wall gives us a width of base plaster of 2.7 metres. C again will be set to 0 because we're going to be plastering right to the bottom of the gable where it meets up with the main wall. And D is going to be 1.3 metres. So the height of the ceiling will be 1.3 metres, which is the height of the gable minus the approximate joist thickness. The middle 3 options relate to insulation, plastering and decoration. We'll leave them set to yes for this example. And on the right hand side here we have got some options to do with skirting. So we're going to set this option here, is gable skirted, to no. You obviously don't need to change the other options because if the skirting is set to no then it will automatically switch off the priming and painting. Though obviously if you were estimating an attic wall you could leave that set to yes and estimate for skirting. Click plastering and decoration to return to the main page of the wizard and then click finish because we've finished estimating the 2 side walls of the extension. So we're now looking at the dimension screen of the worksheet. You can see a column of data here. This corresponds with the dimension wizard we've just been through so that all of the data is identical. Note that the software will often refer to dimensions wizards as DIMS wizards. You can edit the data in this column in this view, just like a spreadsheet. However, with a large data set like this, it's often easier to go back into the DIMS wizard, the dimensions wizard. To do that, you would click on anywhere on the column and then click the DIMS wizard button. Note that at the top of the column here we have the number of identical walls set to 2, showing us that this one column of data is estimating 2 walls. Whilst we're thinking about that then, if you click your mouse into the heading of the column, we can actually change the name of the column. So delete the contents of the box and then type in side walls and then press the enter key. By doing this you can label columns of data to remind yourself what part of the project the data is for. With our small extension it's fairly obvious, so it's probably not quite as important, but if you're estimating a complex house then you might have many different walls and it helps when you're looking back over the data to label each dimensional column there. So far we've estimated our two side walls, so we now need to estimate the main wall of the extension. To do this, we need to add another column of data. We need to click the Add Column button. Once again, we're going to select the single story cavity wall dimensional template, and then we're going to click Select. So now we're going to go through the dimensions wizard again to create the main wall. This will need an area of opening because we're going to be fitting our bifold door into the extension. So on page 1, change the height of the wall to 2.4 meters again to match the side walls. You can press the Tab key to move between the input boxes, remember. We're going to set the length of the wall to 5 meters. On the right hand side here, we're going to leave the number of identical walls set to 1 because we're not duplicating, we're not estimating for multiple walls this time. We don't need to look at the gable dimensions this time because this part of the wall doesn't have a gable. But we do need to put an area of opening into the area of openings box here. Remember, when we put an area into the area of openings box, EstimatorXpress will remove the bricks, blocks and so on from this area, and that's going to be where the bifold door is. So we're going to be fitting a 3 meter wide bifold door, so the area of opening is 3 times 2.1, the width of the door multiplied by the height. So our area of opening is going to be 6.3 square meters. So type in the area of opening of 6.3 square meters and then click Next. On page 2, we're going to set the option to plan construct the excavation to No. And then click Next again. On page 3, we're going to leave the footing details as they are, so we're going to click Next. And then finally on to page 4, change the wall finishing options if you want to match these settings for the side walls. Again, as there's no gable, we can ignore the plastering and decoration to gable screen there. So once you're happy with those finishing options, click Finish. As before, we can click into the column header, delete the column name and type in a new name. This time let's call it the back wall or main wall, whatever makes sense to you. So now we've created dimensions for 3 walls, 2 side walls with gables and 1 main wall with a large opening. What we're going to look at next, while still within this workbook, is the resources being used by the workbook, the materials, the labour, the plant and so on. There are 2 different ways of doing this. The first option is the resources wizard. If you click the resources wizard button, you will launch the resources wizard screen. This screen allows you to click on an item, and on the right hand side it will show you what resource is being used. For example, if you click on the next button twice to take you to page 3, and then click on the cavity insulation, you'll see that you can now pick your insulation product from the drop down box on the right hand side, underneath where it says resource used. So when you click on that drop down box, you'll see a list of products in the price book, allowing you to select an alternative product. So for practice, let's choose a 75mm Celotex product. If we scroll down, let's use this product here, the GA4000, supplied by Jewson, 75mm. So if you click on that product, and once you've done that, the Edit Resource box will appear. Click on the calculator icon to check the usage factor. So at the moment it's saying we use 1 sheet of Celotex board to cover 5.46 meters squared of cavity insulation. At the moment this is actually incorrect because the usage factor matches the old material which was selected. So we need to change that to say we use 1 Celotex board to cover 2.88 square meters. Once you've done that, click OK. and the usage factor is updated. Click OK again. So you can apply this to picking any object in the wall construction and changing a material. Note that you've only changed the cavity insulation within this particular workbook, within this estimate. So let's click Close to close the Resources wizard. The other option we have for checking resources is the View Resources Output button. Click on this button on the top menu and you'll be taken to the Resources screen. This should look familiar as the layout is completely identical to the specifications. In fact, what you're looking at is the top section of the specification, as you can see where each line has pulled its data across from the specification. So we've got the item used for, the description of the resource being used, the purchase cost, the build phase, and so on. You can alter items in here the same way as in the specifications by using the Change Resource button or the Edit Resource button. The Change Resource button is used to select a different resource, and the Edit Resource button is used to alter the usage factor of a product. This list view, once you get familiar with it, is a really great way to quickly review the result of your estimating and get a snapshot of the materials being used and the quantities. So for a quick bit of practice, we're going to change the insulation material. So if you look down the list to find the cavity insulation, and then we're going to click the Change Resource button. So we're going to go through changing a resource from the View Resources Output screen. So the price book will open up and we're going to scroll down and locate the polyisocyanurate resource. If you scroll down too far like I have, we can use the Find button to locate the resource we're looking for. So I'm going to type in polyiso and click Find, and then we'll jump to the correct section of the price book. So here you'll see we've got our polyisocyanurate insulation board resources. So we're going to click on the 75mm option, and once you've selected the resource you want to swap into your workbook, you can then click the Select Resource button. The Edit Resource dialog box pops up. If we click the Calculator button, we can check the usage factor. At the moment it's saying we need one polyiso insulation board to cover 2.88 square meters of cavity insulation. So that's fine, that's correct. Click OK and click OK once again, and that will take you back to the View Resources Output screen, and you can see that the resource for our cavity insulation has been changed. Remember, when you're changing a material, you also need to think about whether it will have an impact on the speed of construction. So we now need to look down the list for the line that deals with fitting the insulation. If we scroll down about 15 lines from the bottom, we should see a line called Fix Cavity Insulation, and that is where the labour for fitting the insulation is estimated. So remember, this time we're not changing the resource. We're happy to still use our 2 bricklayers and a mate, but we are going to edit the usage factor. So we need to click the Edit Resource button. And once the Edit Resource box is open, we can click the calculator icon. And we're going to change the figure at the top to say that it takes 2 hours to fit 27.78 meters squared of cavity insulation, just as an example of how you might want to change your usage factor there for a resource. So once you've done that, click OK, and there we will see the rate for fixing the cavity insulation will have doubled. So the two procedures we've just run through are exactly the same as changing or editing resources in your specifications, as we did in Module 2. Altering items within a workbook is handy for those ad hoc changes you need to make. But if you find you're making the same alterations in a workbook over and over again in different estimates, then you should have a look at making the alterations in the applicable specification to save yourself having to repeat it. This will save you time in the long run. Okay, so now we've finished with this screen, click the back button. That will take you back to the dimensions screen. And you can either click close and close again to return to the job summary screen, or you can click the summary tab to return to the list of workbooks. Remember, if you click the summary tab to return straight back to the summary, you can set that workbook to be completed by right-clicking on the workbook and clicking toggle workbook complete. The next workbook then we're going to look at is the lean-to roof. Find this workbook on your list. You may need to scroll down a bit. Locate the lean-to roof workbook and open it up. As with all of your workbooks, you can change the name and location of the worksheet if you want to. Otherwise, you can just click OK to accept those those EstimatorXpress defaults. So we'll click OK. And you'll get a box popping up offering you some different dimensional templates. Now, the roof dimensional templates selection screens are slightly different to the others, as they have this extra option at the top. Now, this extra option picks up data from any cavity wall workbooks that you may have used. The drop-down allows you to select a wall width from the walls you've estimated when the walls are not 300mm wide. So typically, if you're estimating part L walls, they might be 340mm or 350mm wide. If you've estimated with one of these, you can use this drop-down box to select that wall width, and it will pre-fill all the relevant fields, all of the wall width fields within the roof dimensions wizard. You don't have to do this, but it will save time and avoid possible errors. As we've estimated a standard 300mm wide wall in our brick and block cavity wall workbook, we don't actually need to use this option, as 300mm is the default in all of the roof workbooks. So we can ignore the top drop-down box for our extension example today, which already has 300mm wide walls. So now we can look at the 4 different template options. There are different combinations of roofs, either with soffits and fascias or without, and there are also options for plaster ceilings, in other words flat ceilings, and vaulted ceilings. We're going to select the roof with soffits and fascias and insulation and plastering to a vaulted ceiling. That's the third template on the list. Once you've clicked on it, click select. So let's have a look at the dimensions for the roof, and we're going to start with the gable end. So working from the left, we've got the soffit width, then we've got the width of the wall. So had we used the drop down on the template picker, dimensional template picker screen we've just seen, and selected a wider wall width, something like 0.35, then that figure would be showing here. So the next figure is the clear span of joists. You probably remember that our extension projects 3 meters from the house, so the clear span will be 3 meters minus the 0.3 meters for the external wall, giving us a clear span of 2.7 meters. So we're going to click into that input box and type 2.7 for our clear span. The internal wall width is not relevant. We can leave that set to 0. And you'll see the note here explains that you would only enter a wall width there for a monopitch roof where the roof extends over the wall. You'll notice we've got a cavity tray here. The cavity tray is estimated in the lean-to roof workbook. On the right hand side then, I'm going to click into the pitch of roof input box and set that to 22 degrees. It's going to be rather a shallow roof. As this is a vaulted ceiling, we're going to set the number of purlins and binders to 0, and we'll leave the number of eaves fascias set to 1. Now we're going to click next. So the next screen shows along the length of our roof the eaves of our roof. So we have the soffit width to each end, and then we have the wall thickness, and then we have the internal eaves length. Again, we're going to need to update this. So if our extension is 5 meters long, we need to subtract the wall widths, giving us an internal length of 4.4 meters. you'll notice our joist centres are set to 0 because we're not going to have any joists because we're not estimating a flat ceiling. This workbook will estimate the flat ceiling if you have entered a figure here. So if you selected a flat roof dimensional template at the outset, then there would be a figure in there. The rafter centres are set to 0.4 metres as you'd expect. Cast your eye over the options on the right hand side, check they're all correct, and then click Next. Next, the wizard is asking for the length of the abutment. Of course, you'll only need to enter that if one or two ends of the roof are adjoining a wall. So you'd enter the length of the abutment if there was one, and then you would enter the number of gable abutments here, either 1 or 2. As this roof isn't abutting a wall, we're going to leave them set to 0. The insulation overlap here is set to 0.2 metres, that's fine. One thing you really do need to check every time is the spacing of the tile lath or the battens. This will vary from 0.1, which is the spacing you'll use if you're fitting clay tiles, to 0.3 if you're using modern pan tiles as we are. So change that figure to 0.3. On the right hand side here then we've got an option for fitting sarking board. Set that to yes if you want to estimate sarking board. As it's a vaulted ceiling, the insulation to rafters is set to yes, and the insulation to the ceiling, the flat ceiling, is set to no. So that's correct for the type of roof we are constructing. Click Next. And then the last screen deals with the finishes, which is pretty similar to the wall workbook and to most workbooks. You'll finish with a screen which deals with plastering and decoration and so on. So the underside of the rafters are set to be plastered and decorated, which is what we want. Now the options to prime and decorate the barge boards and fascias are currently set to no. We find that most people use PVC fascias, so that's correct. However, you'll recall that for this job we selected a softwood fascia and barge board mini spec when we created the estimate. So we're going to need to decorate our barge boards and fascias. We're going to set that to yes to prime, yes to decorate them, and the same for the soffits. We want to prime and decorate our softwood soffits. As we don't have a flat ceiling, we don't need to plaster and decorate it, so they're correctly set to no. So once you're happy with all of those options, click Finish, and this will return you to the dimension screen. If you want to review the data, you can do so using the Dimensions wizard. So if you click on the column of data, click the Dims wizard or Dimensions wizard button, and you can go back into that Dimensions wizard and check all of the figures. Let's cancel that for now. You can scroll down the screen to review the dimensions, but the roof workbooks are really quite long lists, so we'd always recommend using the Dimensions wizard to review the data. Let's have a look at the View Resources output to see what we've actually estimated. So if we look down the screen, we will see that the fascias and barge boards are 200mm softwood materials, as we selected in the original mini spec when we created the estimate. If we scroll down a bit further and look at the tiles, you'll see we've got the modern concrete interlocking pan tile selected. Again, that was our mini spec selection. And for our guttering, we've got the rectangular gutter with 80mm downpipes, again as per our mini spec selection. Okay, so that's the roof estimate. Click the Summary tab and we'll return directly to the Job Summary screen. And then we're going to right click on the Lean-to Roof workbook and we're going to set it to be completed. Right click and click the Toggle Workbook Complete option. The next workbook then we're going to look at is the Structural Opening workbook. If we scroll up the screen a bit, you'll see that there are 4 different workbooks which deal with structural openings. The 2 small ones are for smaller door-sized openings, and the 2 other workbooks are for larger openings from about 2.4 meters up to about 4.2 meters. We have options for estimating openings into new walls. So these estimate the fitting of a lintel and making good, and you'd use those if you're building a new wall with an opening, as the name suggests. The other workbooks are to estimate an opening into an existing wall. These estimate the forming of the opening, the plant required, as well as the lintel and the making good. So let's estimate the opening into our extension using the Structural Opening Workbook. Click on the Structural Opening Workbook and then click Open Workbook. And once that workbook opens up, you'll see that we have worksheets for 3 typical sized openings: small, medium and large openings. Often all you need to do is choose which size you want and enter 1 into the number of identical openings column, and you'd leave the others set to 0. For normal estimating purposes, that's it. But I'm just going to go into the workbook and show you the workbook in a bit more detail, and I'll also talk to you about how you can tweak the workbook to suit certain jobs. So we're going to click on the medium opening and click the Open Worksheet button. And there's already a dimensional column there for a standard opening, so we just need to click on the column and click the Dims Wizard button to open it. And there's a few different things that we're going to need to change here. So on the left hand side we have got the, if I should turn the tech tips on, we've got the reveal depth, which is set to 0.275 at the moment. I'm going to change that to 0.3 for this example. The lintel end bearing is set to 150 millimeters or 0.15 meters, which is pretty standard. Then we have the height of the opening, 2.1, and the width of the opening. And then on the right hand side we have several choices for the packing of the underside of the lintel. You'll probably want pad stones, so leave that set to yes. And then you can enter the number of bricks and slates required for packing. The bulking factor for the spoil is 2, because when bricks and blocks are removed and thrown into a skip, they don't fit all that neatly. They typically take up twice as much room in a skip as they do in the wall. We also need the wall thickness here to calculate the amount of spoil. So I'm going to set that to 0.3 meters again. If you're happy with those settings, click Next. On the next screen we've got the spacing of the noggins and the length of the noggins. Tell the software if you want the reveal to be plastered, the number of angle beads required, and whether you want to paint the reveals. Once they're all set, click Finish. And as in the other workbooks, we can click View Resources Output to review the resources which have been estimated. Now in this workbook we have some calculated items in the top section here. These are calculated based on the size of the opening, so they mostly deal with the RSJs themselves, with plastering, with decoration and the making good. The workbook also calculates how much of a skip is needed. Underneath this we have the sundry section. Now the sundry section deals with items which are not calculated. In other words, they're not based on the dimensions we've entered. These lines here are pre-filled with appropriate figures. So this is roughly the amount of time we think it will take to form the opening for a medium-sized opening. If we'd opened the worksheet for a larger size of opening, the figures would be higher. However, there may be situations where you want to change the figures. Say for example you were forming the opening into a stone wall. That could take much longer, so you'd want to increase the number of hours to form the opening. So if we wanted to double the amount of labour to form the opening, we could set those to 16 hours instead. If you were using a more heavy-duty lintel, you might want to increase the time it takes to fix the lintel, and also increase your quantity of strong boys and acropops, etc. So if we wanted more strong boys, for example, Remember, you can always use the Views Highlight Selected Line option to help you focus in on a particular line. We could set the number of strong buoys to 6, for example, if we were dealing with a heavier duty lintel. So you can tweak things in this way in all opening workbooks, both the small ones and the large ones. You can also do it in window and door workbooks as well. So the main thing to remember is that openings, doors and windows, they all have two sections. The top half of the screen, there are calculated resources, and on the bottom half of the screen we've got the sundry resources, which you can tweak because the quantity per item column here is white, so you can adapt those figures to suit your job. Let's go back to the Summary tab. Click Summary. And we're also going to have a look at the window workbook. If you can locate the PVCU Windows 1200 Deep workbook. Remember, if you can't find it just by looking, you can always click the Find button and type in PVCU Windows or something similar. Once you've located the workbook, click Open. As with the Structural Opening workbook, you'll see that windows have pre-filled data. So often, for estimating purposes, all you will need to do is enter the number of each type of window you need. So if you were building a house, perhaps you would need 2 small windows, 6 medium-sized ones, and a couple of large windows. So if you enter the figures there, EstimatorXpress will estimate forming the opening, fitting the glazing, and making good. Of course, there are tasks in there that you may or may not be doing, so let's go into the workbook and have a bit more of a look at the data. So I'll set the number of identical windows to 0 for these 2 smaller sizes, and let's say we have one 312C window. That's an 1800 by 1200 wide window. Click on the 312C worksheet and click the Open Worksheet button. And once we're in there, we're going to go to View Resources Output. So the top half of the workbook here deals with the calculated items, fixings and finishings, so plaster, silicone, decoration, both the material and the labour items. The bottom half of the screen deals with the sundry items. So because this is an 800 by 1200 window worksheet, we have got an 800 by 1200 window specified. We also have a 2.1 metre long lintel specified. Again, this will suit our 1800 wide window. We have cavity closers, and we have the joiner's time to fix the window and the glazing. Now, quite a common scenario that we come across is that the builder will form the opening and subcontract out the glazing to a third-party glazer. If that's the case, you can set the window quantity to 0, because the window contractor is supplying the window. And then you could also set the fixing of the window and the fixing of the glazing to 0, because again, the subcontractor will be doing those tasks. So what you've done there is you removed all of the PVCU elements as the third-party contractor is supplying and fitting them. You still have a cost up here of £409. That's the cost to you as a builder, to form the opening, to plaster and decorate and to make good. You then use the subcontractor workbook to add a supply and fit costs for fitting the windows. For now I'm going to set these figures back to 1, and then I'm going to click Summary to return to the job summary. So I want to finish by having a look at a composite or a list type of workbook. The ones we've been working on have been mostly dimension-based workbooks. So we're going to have a look at the electrical sockets workbook. Click the Find button, type in electrical, excuse my uppercase, and you'll find some different electrics workbooks here. We're going to click on the electrical sockets workbook, click open workbook. As with the openings, electrical workbooks have lots of pre-filled data in them. So we can just put in the quantities of each component we need. So for our single story extension, perhaps we want 4 double sockets downstairs. Enter the number into the number of items. So for estimating purposes, you just enter the figures in here and then you could return to the job summary. But let's open up the worksheet for the double socket downstairs and see exactly what's been estimated when we enter a quantity in there. So you'll see that for each electrical socket it's estimating the back box and fixings, cable clips, sheathing, the cable, so we've got 6 meters of cable per double socket, and then of course the electrician's time to fit the socket. And I should mention of course the socket itself. So most of the time all you need to do is open the workbook up and enter the quantity you need and return to the summary. You can do a similar thing for internal lighting, for kitchen electrics, bathroom electrics and so on. So we're going to click summary and return to the job summary screen. And I'm going to finish by talking for a moment about how you would work your way through the workbooks. So we've started off with a very large list of workbooks and we've been dipping into different workbooks that we wanted to use today. But when you're estimating by yourself, you probably want to start at the top and work your way down the list. So if we scroll back up to the top, you can see that we've entered costs for the first 4 workbooks. So you'd continue working your way down the list and opening up any workbooks where you think you need to enter data. So you might want to open up the site strip workbook if it were a new build and go through that. For our extension, we might not need that workbook. We might not need a shallow access manhole or inspection chamber because we're just going to be connecting up to the existing drainage system. If you don't need to use a workbook, you can just ignore it. You can delete it from the list if you prefer, but the quickest thing to do is just to ignore it. Unless you open it up and put some data in, it's not going to estimate anything. So again, working our way down the list, we probably don't need the soakaway, so we can just ignore it. But we will need drain runs to connect the downpipe to the existing drain system. We'll also need drainage plant to dig the hole, so you'd want to open up those 2 workbooks and go in and estimate the costs there. Some people like to use the scaffolding workbook to estimate the scaffolding. Other people will enter it as a subcontract quote in the subcontract quotations workbook. It's up to you. And then you can see we've estimated our brick and block cavity walls. We don't need to estimate external cavity block walls or stone faced cavity walls or multi-leaf brick walls. So again, you can just ignore those workbooks if you don't need them. One thing you're definitely going to need is some wall starters, which are several lines further down. So you'd want to go in and estimate them there. So you just continue working your way down the list in this way until you're confident that everything is accounted for. And that concludes Module 3, Part 2 of the EstimatorXpress Software Skills course.